A lot of companies talk about having a data-driven culture, but does your company really rely on data to make every decision? Data-driven culture is something a lot of companies strive to develop, and the reason for that is that data is almost ubiquitous in today's environment. Every associate, every employee in the business has access to data that they can use to make decisions about their job, and the companies that do it well have a competitive advantage over the companies that don't do it well. What a data-driven culture really means is that the right people have access to the right data. We focus on the right data to support problems. We use the right data to drive initiatives forward. And that when we don't have proper strategies in place or we don't have the right data available, we understand its limitations and we have strategies and procedures in place to avoid getting into trouble. Having a data-driven culture does not mean just having a lot of metrics, spending a lot of time looking at dashboards that aren't relevant for your role, or coming up with pretty infographics that you post on your social media page. There are two levels to a data-driven culture that are often forgotten. The first one is a people-centered level. We need to make sure that the right people in the organization are doing the right things to drive data-driven culture forward. But there's also a technical aspect. A lot of companies think that because they're capturing data, they're getting value out of it, but it's not really the case. You need to make sure the right people have access to it and they're analyzing it in the right way and sharing it with the right people who can then use it to make a decision before you can have a truly data-driven culture. And that means that you need the right tools in place, you need the right teams in place, you need the right access controls in place, and you need the right data governance in place to make sure all of that can happen. Data-driven culture starts from the top. It starts with leadership. Leaders need to make sure they're engaging with the right pieces of data to make decisions about the direction of the business, when to launch new products, and when to open new stores. This trickles down through the rest of the organization. People want to emulate their bosses, so when they see their leaders working with data, they're going to want to work with the same data too, particularly if we're pulling the same KPIs and the same information throughout the whole business. The second level of this is if we want to pull the right data down throughout the organization, we need to make sure we have the technical infrastructure in place to support that. That means not only that we're capturing the correct data and that we're delivering it in a timely way to the right people, but that we're able to update the right reports. The reports go to people throughout the organization so that everyone has access to the KPIs that leadership is tracking towards. Leaders can't use data for decisions if they don't have access to it or if the data is not relevant or too old by the time they come to make that decision. Poor data infrastructure is a big risk for organizations. If people don't have access to the right data, they're not making decisions based on data. But also they don't trust dashboards, they don't trust metrics, they don't trust models or recommendations that come from being made with that data. That leads to the organization often falling back on common issues like cherry picking the data that they want because it supports their case, or deciding based on gut feeling and not understanding the risks of what they're doing. A third aspect of data culture is embedding data expertise throughout the organization. A lot of organizations choose to put their data scientists and their data individuals on one team that's protected from the rest of the business and sits in some corner somewhere, maybe in a corporate office, and works on big initiatives. That can work, but it's more helpful to have those data scientists embedded in some of the business teams so that they're able to develop their business context for the problems they're trying to solve, and so that they're able to share insights with frontline leaders as the frontline leaders are making the decision. If the data scientists are too disconnected from the business, then the models that they build and the reports that they build and the insights that they share are not going to be relevant for the decisions that people are making day to day to move the business forward. If they're embedded within the teams, they understand the business context, they're regularly questioned on the business context so that they can continue to adapt models and reports to make sure they reflect what's actually happening on the ground. And thirdly, they're able to provide their expertise to business leaders within the same team so that those business leaders become more comfortable with the data that they're looking at. Essentially, what we're doing is we're pulling the data scientists towards the business users, and we're pulling the business users towards the data scientists, forcing them to interact on the same team so that the business literacy of the data scientists improves, while the data literacy of the business leaders improves. This also leads to improving the data literacy of the organization overall. If the organization overall really deeply understands the KPIs that we're tracking towards, the type of actions that influence those KPIs, and the things that they do in their job day to day that influence those KPIs, they're going to make better decisions and everyone's going to be pulling in the same direction towards the same metrics. Another important aspect of data-driven organizations is a cultural shift towards trust, but with curiosity. And what I mean by that is that organizations that have a lot of trust in the data and a lot of trust in each other are able to ask the difficult questions that lead them to understand what's really happening in the data and what the data is really telling them. Employees should be free to question each other in their use of the data. They should be free to challenge each other's thinking so that we get to an optimal outcome. There's definitely good questions to ask of the data, but a lot of organizations are asking unproductive questions. Is this data wrong? Where did this data come from? I don't believe this data. I like my own data over here because this metric doesn't match this metric. Those are not productive questions to ask. Those are data infrastructure questions that mean there's a lack of trust in the way the data is being pulled and the way it's being delivered. Unless we can address those infrastructure issues, we're not going to be able to build a data-driven culture. Productive questions are, what else should we consider? What is this data missing? Is there any bias in the data? Those are the questions that allow us to dig in and either find a different data source or to challenge our thinking to really think through the problem and understand at a deep level whether we're making the right decision. Ultimately, asking these questions right is going to lead teams to work through problems together using both the data and the business knowledge of the business leaders to come to an optimal decision about what to do next. Research has shown that leadership teams that embrace and challenge their data teams to quantify uncertainty are more successful than those that don't. There's no such thing as a data project that results in a 1 or a 0. Everything always has a level of uncertainty about it. Any prediction about the future has a level of uncertainty about it. Just look at weather forecasts, for example. Tracking the accuracy and the uncertainty of the models that we're given means that leaders can understand when the model doesn't have a great answer or where there's gray area that they need to lean into their business experience to understand and to help bridge that gap. But it also challenges the data teams to continually go back and refine the models and the uncertainty levels to make them more accurate and to reduce the uncertainty. When leaders and data scientists work through the uncertainty together, they're able to quantify it and they're able to be comfortable operating in that gray area where they're not sure whether the model's perfect, but they have enough business context and business understanding to still make a good decision. Successful data teams also understand the limits of their data. If we're launching a new product into a new market, we might not have any good data that explains exactly what's going to happen when we launch it. Good data-driven teams understand this and have ways and guidelines in place to account for it. There might be procedures in place that we go through when looking at a new product. There might be checkpoints in place after we've launched the product that says, is it doing this well? If it isn't, then we do this to pivot. If it is, then we do this to pivot and lean into it. Those sort of checkpoints, those sort of guidelines, and those sort of procedures allow you to pull through the data-driven culture even when there isn't a lot of data to support the initial decision. A lot of the aspects of a data-driven culture really do circle back to leadership. Leadership needs to set an example. Leadership needs to invest in the right infrastructure to pull it through. We need to have an organizational design that allows data expertise and data knowledge to sit within the business team instead of being siloed off somewhere else. Training on data literacy for employees throughout the organization allows them to better leverage it. And leadership teams that embrace uncertainty and ask their data teams to quantify the uncertainty in their models will end up making better decisions even when there isn't that much data available. Thanks for watching. If you found this content helpful, please do like and subscribe to the video. Penguin Analytics offers training and coaching for individuals on teams on data literacy, data fluency, and general data topics. If this sounds like something that will be helpful, please do reach out and we'll set up time for a consultation. Thanks for watching.